Okay.
Yes, we're live streaming now.
We're live streaming. Welcome all. I'm just wondering whether we should make an allowance for people's technical difficulties and whether we should wait another minute, or do you think we should just make a start? Angela, are we expecting?
I think we're expecting one more member to come along. So if you're happy to wait a moment, perhaps give them a chance to manage the technical side of it.
I'll wait until it says 11:05 on my computer screen, and then I think we should make a start. Well, my computer is telling me, folks, that it's now 11:05, so I'm going to start the committee. My name is Councillor Jane Scullion, and I'm chairing this meeting on behalf of Councillor Hinchcliffe. So welcome all to the Governance and Audit Committee. Can I start then with any apologies for absence for today?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Hinchcliffe and Councillor Swift.
And I am deputising in Councillor Swift's absence. Move on to item 2 then, declaration of any disclosable pecuniary interests. Anything to declare? Nope. If there is any item that comes up during the meeting, then just speak up and declare it at that point. Thank you. Item 3, exclusion of the press and public. I have been informed that there is no item on the agenda which requires the exclusion of the press or the public, so all of the items are open. And we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee held on the 14th of January. It seems like yesterday actually, but it was indeed the 14th of January. I'm sure people have had a chance to look at those and to check their accuracy. Are people content for that to be agreed as a correct record of the previous meeting, or is there anything which needs amendment? I think we content. Yes, Councillor Lee has indicated, so yes. Okay, thank you very much. Item 5, internal audit progress report. I think this is you, Bron. Straight to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll do a brief summary and then very happy to take questions or any more detailed discussions. So in the progress report, I highlighted what I consider to be the top 3 risks that were worrying us at the moment. Readiness for the elections clearly is having a huge impact on resources and making sure that everybody is doing everything that is needed. We are particularly as well in the internal audit team concerned about COVID recovery, so things like transport and grants to businesses, etc. So we are starting to run data analytics in earnest now so that we have clear plans for next year if there's anything we want to check or follow up on. And then finally, the PCC transfer, just making sure that we have thought of everything. We're working with our colleagues from the OPCC and West Yorkshire Police just to get all of the transfer arrangements in place. And there's quite a lot later in the pack, I believe, around the PCC transfer. So those are the things, the top 3 things that have really been sort of exercising our minds in terms of how we can provide assurance in those areas. And then just briefly in terms of the rest of the report, we're on track to complete the 2021 plan as per the plan in the report. That includes any areas that have been deferred or removed from the plan for this year. But for the remainder, we are on track. We did a lot of advice and guidance work in the early stages of the year to reflect the unusual circumstances that we were working in, but we are now doing quite a lot of assurance pieces. So the team is flat out on trying to make sure there is a good balance come the end of the plan year. We have two new reports that we have highlighted in the paper, one on climate change and one on adult education budget procurement. The adult education budget procurement was very straightforward. They were doing a good job there. The AEB and the procurement teams working well together. Climate change, there was limited assurance on that one. Important to note that it is a reflection of the internal combined authority tackling climate emergency plans, not the wider regional work, which has done very well, notably through some awards recently. But we did highlight that the plan that's in place within the combined authorities is quite extensive. We think it's worth a review and a reprioritisation to make sure that we are tackling things in a very sort of measured way. And I think there's been quite a lot of change within the team. The head of the team moved on during the course of the year, and they are looking to restructure. So we are just going to make sure we follow up on that of this next year to ensure that the recommendations that we've made are addressed. And then finally, the plan for next year is also contained in the paper, and we are seeking approval from this committee today that they are content with the plan as it's proposed. It does now include some feedback from our senior leadership team. We've added in some reviews to reflect things they specifically wanted included. It's important to note that as we found this year, it's important that new risks can take priority, and we can re-look at plans as the year goes forward. That's true of every year, but this last year certainly brought it home to us how important it is to be flexible. So that's a very brief, I hope, suitably sufficient overview of the progress report, but very happy to take any questions or further discussion.
Thank you very much, Bron. Any questions on the internal audit report and the forthcoming plan? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got 2 things I'd like to mention to Bron. The first one on climate change is, could we, when you look at this, could you just review some of the base assumptions that are being taken for meeting the climate emergency measures that certainly are the targets in Calderdale, but elsewhere in the West Yorkshire Combined Authority area. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, I have some doubts about base assumptions that have been made, which must happen if we're to achieve our objectives. So I think that everybody would feel reassured if you could have a good look at that and report back and tell us that all of the base assumptions are realistic, and if those aspirations happen, we will meet our climate targets. But if you start with some bad data, frequently that's the cause of failing to hit target. So that's one concern I've got. The other one, you mentioned about the forthcoming elections. And as we know, public gatherings of any kind can turn a bit nasty at the present time. And, you know, one always has to bear that in mind. And as I understand it, the polling stations will not be fully manned like we might expect them to be normally. But many people will vote by post anyway. But I understand that the plans that lie behind the polling station operations are that if there's a queue, which there well might be at the end of the day if it's 10 o'clock that it finishes. There's a queue that's built up because of lack of personnel for obvious COVID reasons, that somebody is going to make a decision outside who's queuing at 10 o'clock, and that's where the cut-off point is. They'll be allowed in, and anybody that comes along after that is going to be denied to vote because it's after 10 o'clock. Now, if you remember in Sheffield at one of the general elections in recent years, there was big problems with this and almost a riot going on outside. So can we check that there's some safeguards at the time that the polling stations close that will deal with potential hotspots of arguments that could occur? And I think it's worth just considering that, do a detailed risk analysis of whether that may be a problem and seek to find a way to resolve those problems should they occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Angela or Bron, which of you wants to just respond initially to those two? Angela.
I think on the point on polls, absolutely happy to take that concern back to the electoral teams that we're working with. They are risk assessing the voting arrangements from a multitude of different factors. So that work is underway. As you say, they are also very mindful that postal votes may offer some people reassurance about a safe way to vote. And I'm sure you're probably aware, I think all the local authorities have written out to remind people of their the way to apply for a postal vote. But happy to take that, because we are working closely with Leeds Council, who are acting as the combined authority returning officer for the mayoral election. So happy to feed your comments back. I'm fairly positive they will be considering these. They've got a very thorough approach and working with all of the other teams, but we'll flag that, and if there's any concerns, I'll report them back to you. The climate change baseline, I'm sure Bron can provide some assurance about how that's being managed.
As I was saying, we are going to do some follow-up on that this year, so I'm very happy to go and specifically look at the baseline assumptions and come back and do a bit of feedback on those. So we'll build that into our follow-up work.
Thank you, Bron. I have to say, it gave me some level of assurance that, and I'd like to see this in the report, the fact that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority had in fact had an award for its climate change, but nonetheless, internal audit were going to run the rule over it pretty thoroughly. And actually that did give me some assurance, because awards are great to have and we all make an enormous amount of it, but actually you always do need to have an assurance that this is actually much more soundly based, and internal auditor are the people to do that. So,
Chair, just by way of example, the one that worries me is I've been told by a very senior WICA officer that an 800% increase in cycling being achieved is essential to meeting our needs. So I have a doubt about that. Maybe right, maybe wrong. But if it's depending on something about which there has to be some doubt, then I'd like to see some kind of a report on that and an assurance that either that's a reasonable assurance and assumption and it will happen and therefore we'll achieve our climate ambitions, or it's unreasonable and that won't help us achieve our climate ambitions, so we'll have to introduce something else that would help us get over the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. That's a very, very important point in terms of the base assumptions. And I think you have raised that point about the cycling previously, or Councillor Caffrey raised it in the Transport Committee. And I think it's something internal audit, I hope, we'll be looking at in terms of Plan A versus Plan B. We're all on this climate change journey together, and we know what the end you're right, really challenging and aspirational target is for the globe, never mind for West Yorkshire. And these are the kind of things in terms of, you know, what are the options, what are the alternatives? And we have to bring the public with us, really, in terms of some of these big initiatives. And each of the 5 councils and the residents there have to actually play their part, as well as the other organisations, partner organisations, not least the transport companies. Okay, any other questions on the internal audit plan? Is the committee content then for the proposed internal audit plan for the coming year to go forward? I certainly am. I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much. And thank you for that, Bron. Thank you, Shabir, and welcome. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 6, external audit progress report. Angela. Angela, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
So thank you, Chair. A couple of items to draw out from the external audit report. So basically this report focuses around fees for current year, next year, and the audit work underway for the current year. So taking those in turn, and then there's a number of points I think that the external auditors would probably like to draw out from the information in the paper and in the appendix. Apologies, my doorbell's just gone. Excuse me, I'll keep talking. The annual accounts, the work is underway, and attached in the appendix is the audit memorandum from Mazars. Maybe Mark would like to explain what's in there while I sort out my doorbell. Apologies.
Good idea.
Yeah.
You're excused, Angela. Mark.
Yeah. So we will take the report as read, Chair, but given that it is perhaps one of the main communications that we have during the year, I think there's merit in us just skipping through the headlines, bringing the key elements to your attention before we invite questions. Having said that, I'll let Mr. Outside do that, but just by way of introduction, as Angela suggested, the Audit Strategy Memorandum sets out our responsibilities as your external auditors in auditing your financial statements, and also in forming a view on your arrangements for securing value for money in your use of resources. It describes our audit approach, the audit timeline, and also highlights our proposed testing strategy in relation to the audit risks that we've identified, both in relation to your financial statements and also our value for money work. Mark will say a little bit more about those risks in just a moment. Key sections that I'd really quickly highlight before handing over to Mark. Section 6, that's page 53 of your pack, in which we highlight the planned fee for the audit. I know Angela will say perhaps a little bit more about those in just a second, but committee members will note the various upward pressures on the audit fee for the current year 2021. They include fees associated with the extra work we are now required to do by our regulators in relation to the valuation of property, plant and equipment, and also pension schemes. Additional fees associated with changes in auditing and accounting standards for 2021, and also the likely increase in fees associated with the new Code of Audit Practice and associated new value for money approach for 2021. And I'll say a little bit more about those in just a moment, if I may. Obviously, we continue to liaise with management on the extent of the actual extra work that will be required in relation to those various elements in this current year. But I would give an early indication to this committee that those fee variations are likely to be in the range of £10,000 to £20,000 collectively. In section 7 of the document there, that's page 55 of your pack, we do confirm, as you would expect, the independence and objectivity of your audit team. I'll hand over to Mark then for a little bit more detail, unless Angela wants to come back in. But if I may, Chair, I'd just like to say, once those two guys have had their say, a little bit more about the new value for money approach and just update the committee on the main changes.
Thank you, Mark. Over to Mark Outerside then, I think, at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'd like to take you through section 4 of the plan, which details the significant risks and other key judgments that we've identified. So on page 14 of the plan, there's a diagram which summarises 3 significant risks in terms of likelihood and financial impact. In terms of the significant risks that we've identified, there's no real surprises in that we've got management override of controls on there, which is a standard risk across all of our audits. We've got valuation of the net pension fund liability and valuation of property and land valuations. Again, very similar to what we identified last year and common across the sector, in fact. These are particularly sensitive this year, given the impact of COVID, and we will be looking into that particularly. On pages 15 to 17, we provide a bit more detail about each of the risks and the rationale for selecting them. And also we highlight what work we will complete to address and mitigate those risks. So the next section that I'd like to draw your attention to, and I think Mark's going to talk to you about in a bit more detail, is section 5 on page 19, which explains the new value for money framework and details the 3 VFM criteria which we will assess your arrangements against, and those have been financial sustainability, governance, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And you will see that we've also said that we haven't actually highlighted any risks in those areas as it stands at the moment, but just to say that this is a watching brief and we will be looking at those continually through the audit. So the next section I'd like to draw your attention to is section 8, which is our materiality assessment. And on page 27, it confirms that at the planning stage, we've assessed a headline materiality of around £5.5 million. And that's based on a testing threshold of 2% of your gross expenditure. Again, very similar to what we assessed last year. Performance materiality, i.e. the level at which we will test the items within your account, has been set at £4.4 million. And it's worth saying that is being assessed at the higher end of our risk threshold. So we're actually saying we've got more comfort over your accounts this year than we've had in the past. And particularly important to those charged with governance, we've set a reporting threshold of 165,000. So that is any errors at or above that amount are what we will report to you at the year end. So, and again, that will be refreshed once we get the final accounts. So I don't actually propose going into any more detail on the report, but we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, please. On materiality, we just did it a few moments ago. The overall materiality, 5.5 million. And you referred to the normal 2% standard that tends to apply depending on turnover. But the West Yorkshire Combined Authority it's not a manufacturing business. It's a money in, money out business. And 5.5 million sounds like a very high threshold for materiality in an organisation of this type. And I just wonder if you have any comments about that. It sounds like we should be concerned at a number far less than 5.5 million if it's money essentially coming in and coming out, and it's not being involving manufacturing processes or complex marketing or sales initiatives or sales levels which can fluctuate in the private sector. So 5.5 million is a lot more than the amount of money that I would wish to be concerned about in general terms. So any comments on that, please, Mark?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Which Mark? Mark Outerside, do you want to take that?
I'll have a go. In terms of how we've set materiality, Councillor, is an industry standard in that, or a sector standard, in that for all of our local government clients, we do set materiality based on gross expenditure. The rationale being that is, yes, you do receive the money in from whether it be central government or local taxpayers, but the risk is around how you spend that money. So that's why we assign materiality to gross expenditure. And there's also a percentage that we apply between 1% and 2%, and we've applied 2% because we think it's a firm standard, as in Mazars allow us to set it between 1% and 2%, and we've set it at the higher range because we think it's less risk at West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Okay. Well,
deal with your point, Councillor Lee.
Clearly, that's been thought about, and you've come to that conclusion. But Wicker is different to local authorities like Leeds or Calderdale, where there are a number of activities that are being performed that could lead to risks that you might want a wider allowance for. In this 5.5 million, the number that you've got, it could be 2.75 million on that basis on what you've said. And I think that I'm just querying that's too high and it should be lower. I don't doubt it's been well considered by all of you guys.
Can I ask Mark Dalton from Mazars to come in, please?
Yes, I just wanted to further reassure the councillor and also the committee that we will obviously be testing a number of items below that headline materiality level. And the committee will know that we set performance materiality actually at a lower level, 4.4 million, and it's that level that directs our audit testing. But again, as I said, just to reassure the committee, we will be doing extensive and substantive testing below those levels, and will report any errors that we identify through that testing, in fact, above 160,000 to this committee itself. So hopefully that further reassures the councillor that not just it's an industry or a sector standard, but we will certainly be testing below that level.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, and thank you for the question, Councillor Lee. Okay, I'm going to come back, if I may, then to Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for before. If I could just pick up the fees, and I think one of the marks may wish to come back in on that as well. The paper included Appendix A, Appendix 1, sorry, our response to the consultation that was going on around a number of audit issues, including fees. The fee situation is still in a bit of flux here, so the paper does include, and as does Mark's a memorandum in the appendix, the confirmation for the starting point for the audit fee for the current year. I think members be aware we've talked about the audit fee on a number of occasions. I know there's been concern at the extent of work that can be done for such a fee, and you've had reassurances back from the external auditors that they are confident they're able to provide the high quality audit that they do for the fee that we pay. However, there are changes afoot, and our current level, there are two changes afoot. One is the increased work being set nationally. So Mark referred to it before, and I think he may wish to pick up again, but this is around the value for money work. So we've got some additional work to do where we will have to demonstrate more clearly what we are achieving with the money that we get. And the increase in fee there it's not unique to us. Will be applied across the industry. So it's nothing, we haven't done anything wrong. We haven't been assessed as anything more risky than anywhere else in that regard. The other one playing in, and we'll probably pick it up slightly later as well, is the nature of the combined authority changes quite dramatically. We've already got the first stage of the mayoral changes in from when the order was laid in January. The mayor coming in May brings in other powers and some change in the workload, and also around the audit arrangements, which so we'll pick up in a later paper on the PCC. We're likely to have to come back to you with a revision to the fee at the next meeting to reflect some of the statutory changes underway, as well as some of the audit regulatory changes underway.
Thank you, Angela. A year like no other in many ways. And of course, we are going through a major change, and you're right to flag up the changes in accounting codes and so on as well. Mark, do you want to come back and say anything further about fees?
You just really quickly, I suppose in part to reassure the committee that this is very much a national rather than a local issue, and certainly nothing specific to Wicker, but the government itself has actually recognised the increased pressure on auditors and audit fees, and is making £15 million worth of additional funding available to the local government sector. It's unclear yet as to how or on what basis that will be distributed, but hopefully just reassures the committee that those pressures, the upward pressure on fees, is certainly recognised by central government and in part is being funded by them. I did also, if I may, Chair, just want to pick up on the new Code of Audit Practice and the new value for money approach. Committee members may recall we mentioned this at the last committee meeting, and we said we would come back with a bit more detail. We have in section 5 of our audit strategy memorandum, which is on pages 49 to 50, provided further insight into the new requirements. And as I said, just wanted to spend a couple of minutes, if I may, Chair, just highlighting the key changes. So under the new Code of Audit Practice, we will no longer report in the form of a binary conclusion on your value for money arrangements. i.e. what you won't see is a qualified or an unqualified value for money conclusion, an overall conclusion on whether you've got proper arrangements in place or not. The key output now will be in the form of an annual narrative commentary on your arrangements to secure value for money. That new narrative commentary will be quite detailed in nature and will cover all of your arrangements under the 3 specified reporting criteria of financial sustainability, governance, and improving economic efficiency and effectiveness. Further details of those reporting criteria and the sub-criteria are provided on page 50 of your pack. I think it's fair to say that development and agreement of that value for money commentary is likely to require more input, both from management, as Angela's alluded to, but also from us as your auditors. We've already asked management to complete a detailed self-assessment against each of those specified reporting criteria, and the resulting value for money commentary is sure to require more discussion between ourselves as your auditors and the authority. We will report that annual narrative commentary through our new style Auditor's Annual Report, and that Auditor's Annual Report will replace the annual audit letter that you're used to receiving. We will be reporting that Auditor's Annual Report on a more timely basis. That will come to this committee along with our audit completion or ISA 260 report to the Annual Accounts, Governance and Audit Committee in the summer. A further change within the new Code of Audit Practice and that value for money approach is that where our work identifies significant weaknesses in arrangements, we are now required to report those weaknesses along with the actions that need to be taken to address those weaknesses as soon as they become aware, or as soon as we become aware of them. And that's as opposed to waiting until the end of the audit cycle in terms of reporting, as was previously the case. There does seem to be an expectation that the new approach is likely to identify more significant weaknesses in value for money arrangements and give rise to more value for money recommendations, and that's across both the local government and NHS sectors. That's not to say that will be the case for Wicker, and I would also say that's not to suggest it will be the case in the first year of that new approach. As you mentioned, Chair, it's a slightly unusual year, so that might have its impact on this new approach. As I think both Angela and myself have already said, there is likely to be extra work, extra time involved in this, and that is likely to give rise to additional audit fees. I think it's right and proper that we do the work first before we determine what the fees are. But again, just to manage your expectations, we are expecting the fee impact for all bodies to be circa £10,000 in this first year. But as I say, let's do the work first. We'll continue to liaise with management and continue to report back to this committee. I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any further questions, particularly on the fees element and the changes to the National Code of Accounting and the Redmond Review and so on. You have in the pack the initial response from the Combined Authority officers in relation to the points raised within this. Any particular questions? I suppose there is the question, I think it's raised in the response really, that as part of the Redmond Review, you have to show that the accountancy firm does actually have the public sector skilled auditors, but and I think it says, and they must be called Mark.
If I may, Chair, I think that's a very, very fair comment, and it's a real challenge for all audit providers across the public sector market at this time. I suppose just to slightly reassure this committee and management, within your local audit team, that's myself, Mark and Musa, between us, we've got over 50 years experience of auditing public sector bodies such as yourself. So I'd like to think in terms of meeting that particular bullet point within Angela's paper, we're able to put a big tick beside that one.
Good, good. Thank you very much. Any further questions, or have we come to the end of that item? I think that was actually an update for information rather than a decision at this stage. People, committee content? Yes, okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Mark and Mark. The next item on our agenda, folks, is item 7, which is compliance and monitoring. Angela, you want to start us off on that one?
I will, thank you, Chair. This is your regular item on compliance and monitoring, so highlighting any concerns or otherwise around internal controls, treasury management, key indicators, financial monitoring and risks. So briefly, no concerns to flag at this meeting, no significant changes to internal controls, but clearly we are reviewing lots of current ways of working alongside the police and crime commissioner functions transferring across to us, and making sure we are set up to do all of that. We continue our internal meetings, our treasury management. At the last meeting, you considered the treasury management strategy that was approved by the Combined Authority at the budget meeting at the beginning of February. So is in place for the coming year, and we'll keep that under review and report any concerns back to you. Key indicators are up to date. Financial monitoring is much the same as the position reported to Combined Authority a month ago. We have got a balanced budget for the current year. We are still on task to achieve that. For next year, we are still working through where we're going to identify some savings to ensure that we don't have to draw on reserves. And the budget also included approval for some of the gain share to be used to support some of the transition costs and the election costs. The report set out a little further down in para 215, just confirmation of where the gain share money has already been allocated, which is a question that has been asked. It's been the year 1 gain share has been approved by Combined Authority. A small amount of next year's has been approved as part of that budget setting. The rest is subject to us approving a process with the Combined Authority in the early part of the coming year. The appendices set out the revenue budget at Appendix 1, the capital budget at Appendix 2. We are in the usual race to the end of March to ensure we get as much spending as we can and maximise the capital funding that we have got. Many of you will be aware that the one of the most significant capital streams we've had around the growth deal is due to come to an end at the end of March. So very much focused on getting that spent. And some of the other funding, the Getting Building Fund is a 2-year programme. This is the end of year 1. Been quite challenging getting that up from a standing start in the year during COVID. But those schemes are progressing well through investment committee. So we'll be able to report back next time, hopefully on a positive position that we will have achieved an appropriate level of capital expenditure. As I say, the report sets out some of the gain share information there, just for information. And the final item is risk management. Appendix 5 gives the headline strategic risks, which have been updated since you last saw them. ensuring that we pick up anything connected to the Mayoral Combined Authority transfer. There are quite a few red risks on there. There's hopefully some narrative that reassures that we're aware of the risks and are working to mitigate them. But it is, as we've mentioned once or twice already, this is a challenging year following on the heels of a challenging year. So it's not surprising the risks are high, but I think hopefully some reassurance there that we have work in train to address those, specifically the risks around the change to becoming a Mayoral Combined Authority. There's the next couple of papers deal with some of those and hopefully give some further reassurance of the practical work underway to make that happen. I will pause there and take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions for Angela? Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Can I just refer to Appendix 2, capital spending? It's on page 73, I think, of the 75 of 118. We just talked about it a moment ago. Out of that £318 million capital expenditure, by a long way, it would appear, the smallest allocation is for brownfield housing. Now, I'm sure this is applicable to the whole of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but I know that it is in Calderdale. In the local plan and in our forward planning, we're going to be building on Greenbelt quite a lot of the time. I would suggest that we could look at that brownfield housing fund budget and make it a good deal larger than that, because it's worth saving Greenbelt if we can somehow produce more brownfield housing sites. And if that's what the money's for, I'd like to see far greater efforts in investing in trying to create more of that or do something about it, clean up what we've got, whatever it is that money's for. I think we could well look at that, add some more money in, produce more brownfield housing site potential, and in so doing, save the Greenbelt throughout our region, because it's very, very important to all of us to preserve that if we can. And that sticks out. It's the only one that's in the thousands in a £318 million budget. And I think that is one that is very important and we could perhaps re-examine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Angela.
Yes, I think you raised a really valid point there. I think the picture you've got there on that appendix is the current year capital spend. The brownfield housing was something new that came to us as a result of becoming a Mayoral Combined Authority, and the amount we got for this year that we're currently in is only 600,000, which is some of the early work. If you go ahead to the, I think Appendix 4 sets out the future years capital funding, and hopefully you'll see there that there's some significant sums penciled in for subsequent years. So it is a timing matter. This year's is simply what we've got for the current year. We've got, it's page 79. In the 3-year programme, the amounts are significantly higher, reflecting the funding that we have been allocated as part of as becoming a Mayoral Combined Authority.
Thank you. I've just seen it. So I'm really pleased about that, because obviously it was a very valid question and it's already been. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and thank you, Angela. Any other questions on that compliance and monitoring report? Or are committee happy to accept that as an update on the current situation? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to number 8, very topical, Mayoral Combined Authority preparations governance. Angela, you again.
Thank you. Yes, there are the next 3 papers are all different elements that are part of our preparations for becoming the Mayoral Combined Authority, or the next stage of it. I should correct myself. We are a Mayoral Combined Authority. Some of the non-mayoral functions are in place now. The mayoral functions will be in once we have a mayor elected. in May time. So the paper, this first paper on page 85 gives an update on the work stream that's looking at decision making and committee arrangements. It reflects it shows some of the work that's underway, some of which has been to the Combined Authority in March, some of which is going back in April. So there's a number of things being put in place. So we have a protocol is in development for some of the concurrent functions that are exercised with constituent council. So once that has been agreed with local authority partners, that will come back to our April meeting. We have also undertaken to do a more formal constitution. We've always had a set of regulatory documents and constitutional documents. We've never pulled them all together into one document that is called the Constitution. So we are looking at the local government association model, but also acknowledging combined authorities aren't quite the same as council. So we're adapting it to ensure it covers our needs. So the Appendix 1 on this paper gives you the outline for all the bits that are going to form the new Constitution, some of which were, as they agreed at the March meeting, some will be agreed in April, and others will come in June. So a huge amount of work underway. Ideally, this all gives us absolutely clear rule book about how things operate, who can do what delegations are, what the role is of different panels and committees, how decision making happens, and gives ourselves and the public clear visibility of how we operate. I'll probably pause at that. If there are questions on that, so the next paper picks up specifically some of the Police and Crime Commissioner functions and the impact on our committee, this committee. And the final paper then on the agenda is boldly called ethics. But if there's any questions on the work underway that I can answer, please do say.
Thank you, Angela. And I think actually, which one is it? The appendix on page 87, which gives the timescale of what happens before at the Combined Authority, what happens now, what happens in April, and what happens when the mayor is in office, is really quite useful actually, because there is so much in your mind, and I can see better from that chart how things unfold and decisions being made at the right time, like things that are concurrent functions and so on. That's very helpful. Questions about this element of the preparations for the MCA, the Mayoral Combined Authority? Councillor Lee.
Just an observation, Chair, if I may, and I'm sure you'd be in full agreement with this, that I think it might not be perfect yet, but congratulations are in order for the team that's assembled this. It's immensely complex, and under very difficult conditions this has been put together. And you know, once we've been going with this for a year or so, there might be some things that we would do differently, but I think very well done on this. It must have exercised a lot of brain power to put it all together. So I am very happy with what's been done so far.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and I'm sure the whole committee would concur. Actually, this is just getting your head around it. It's really quite hard. Any other questions? Okay. Apologise for a bit of noises off. My husband broke his leg at the weekend, and the noise of his crutches getting around is quite loud. If members are content to receive that information from that report, number 8 at this stage, we could move on then, Angela, if we may, to item 9, the Police and Crime Commissioner governance arrangements, which I think are almost more complicated.
Thank you. It is. There is an awful lot of work going on in this space, and thank you for the comments before. I will pass those back to the team. And I just pick up on that. I think you're right. We may well want to change things. There may be iterations as working practices develop, but it'd be great to have this clear starting point. So this paper then looks at the whole world that is Police and Crime Commissioner functions coming across, and what does that mean then for this committee, and also where there is a joint independent audit and ethics committee. In summary, what this paper is saying that there is merit in, they both have a function to serve, and that after May we will continue to have the governance and audit committee because that's a statutory requirement and has a, as you all know, a very clear role and responsibilities. What we're saying is the Joint Independent Audit and Ethics Committee, which is currently the forum that brings together the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable to review their audit and ethics arrangements, also has a valuable role to play as we go forward. They are keen to keep that committee going. We are supportive of that. And I think to note that at this stage, we're saying they will both continue. They will both need a bit of tweaking, perhaps, of the terms of reference, which is programmed in to be done, obviously, at the June meeting, and ensure that the terms of reference and any reporting arrangements between the two are clear. So we want to make sure that each committee understands what it's doing and how any relevant information is shared. It also goes into a little bit of information about external auditors and who approves accounts, because this year this committee will approve our accounts as usual, and we're sticking to the original timescales. The government has extended the timescales again, but we are seeking to do this by September. That will be for our normal combined authority accounts. Meanwhile, the OPCC and Chief Constable, the Chief Constable produces a separate set of accounts as a sole entity. Those accounts are being prepared up to the 10th of May, which is the date of transfer. Those accounts will have to come here to be approved because we take on responsibility for the PCC and that element. What we are suggesting here is the Joint Independent Committee will look at those accounts as they usually do and make a recommendation based on their years of expertise and knowledge at doing this. Next year, this committee will be approving all of the accounts that come through. The audit arrangements around that are being considered by the Chief Constable. At the moment, we have auditors in place and that continues, but Chief Constable is looking at that. The report suggests that there is some benefit in having a shared set of auditors. That is being taken forward to PSAA, who appoint auditors for ourselves and for the Chief Constable and the PCC at the moment. In terms of internal audit, we obviously have our internal audit arrangements. The PCC and police have a shared internal audit arrangement. Given the bulk of the work that happens is in relation to police activities, that internal audit team is now housed within West Yorkshire Police. What we are looking at doing in common with many of the other activities that are run from out West Yorkshire Police on behalf of the PCC, we're looking at putting in place a memorandum of understanding, service level agreement, appropriate arrangements to ensure that we can still access the services that are provided, and that will extend to internal audit. So as and when we feel there is work that needs to be done by that internal audit team, we will have a route to draw on that resource that is within West Yorkshire Police. That is probably the summary of what's in there. I appreciate it. It does reference some of the statutory requirements, and it sets out where we're seeking to be compliant with that. But if I can add any further explanation or answer any questions, happy to do so.
Thank you. And I don't underestimate first of all, the amount of thinking and planning of dovetailing two large organisations, but also keeping some of the, not necessarily the tradition, but the integrity of the policing processes that they have had in place. So I'm certainly content to see the two committees run this year, and I think the arrangements make sense. And if I could echo what Councillor Lee said earlier, we will learn from that experience in the coming year. Any comments or questions from the committee as a whole? No, I'm not seeing MD indicate. I wonder then if we could take the number 10, the third of your trio of papers regarding this, and move on to that, the ethical standards for the MCA.
Thank you. Yes, so it's a bit of a lofty title. It is about a draft members code of conduct, which is an integral part of defining and setting the rules for how we manage ethical standards. So hopefully the committee is aware that we have a code of conduct. Most local authorities have a code of conduct for members, and there are good reasons for having that. The Committee on Standards in Public Life has been reporting, reviewing the arrangements in place and looking at best practice. We looked at that last year and made some minor amendments to our code of conduct. What has now happened is a model code of conduct has been produced by the Local Government Association at the end of last year, and this report is suggesting some changes we make to reflect that. It's worth noting that the legislation at this stage hasn't been changed. That may happen, but as at this stage, the underlying legislation doesn't change. But there are some differences there set out in paragraph 2.5, which hopefully help, particularly some of it's been around members working in a virtual world and making sure that arrangements put in place for normal ways of working are suitably applicable in this way of working. I think it adds further clarification, and I don't think it fundamentally changes anything. It simply clarifies and expands a little. It also does pick up for us the fact that for the first time, the mayor coming in has actually formal decision-making rights, powers that they can do on their acting alone. That is new for us. The moment all of our decisions are made by committees or delegated down to officers from those committees, the mayor, in terms of some of their specific functions, is an independent decision maker. So we're strengthening the code to ensure that we're absolutely clear the way that those sorts of decisions should be made. So the appendix sets out some of the appendix sets out a proposed new code of conduct that we'd like to take onto the combined authority in April. It may need some further tweaking around some of the PCC functions where we're still working through, particularly how some of the complaints work and make sure we've got the right routes for those. But generally, asking if you have any views on the code as set out in Appendix 1, which keeps the best of the one we have, brings in the new items from the model code, and hopefully gives something that is usable, accessible, and helpful to members going forward. Happy for any comments or questions.
Thank you. Angela, can I just check in terms of information? Calderdale has indeed adopted the suggested feature from the LGA new model code of conduct. Do we know if the other 4 authorities are on with that?
I believe they are all on with that. I would have to check where they're up to, but our monitoring officer advised that everybody is looking at this. I think they're all at slightly different stages.
Any questions or comments from the committee on this? No, I think it's very interesting in terms of the kind of expression of the known principles and standards of public life. I do think it raises interesting questions in terms of the mayor having the policing function and just being absolutely, clear in terms of where they are acting alone and where they're acting as the 5+1 of the new mayoral combined authority. And certainly, I think this committee, in this case, Angela, the committee are being asked to recommend that this draft goes forward to the combined authority for consideration and adoption. But you think
Correct.
there may be some minor changes before then? Or?
There may be. We've got probably 3 weeks to see if there's anything else comes out of the PCC work that's underway. If not, it will probably go to the combined authority with the same caveat that there may be some minor changes which are usually delegated to the monitoring officer to make. Significant changes will come back through committee. Minor updates are within her delegation.
Are the committee then content to recommend, the recommendation is phrased that the committee recommend the combined authority adopts the attached code of conduct as drafted at Appendix 1 with effect from the 10th of May when the Mayor comes into office, subject to any further amendments to reflect the transfer of the Police and Crime Commissioner functions into the combined authority. Are the committee content to make that recommendation? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Okay. Thank you, Angela, very much for that. We're getting our heads around it gradually. Be an interesting year, won't it? Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. Angela, unless there's anything else you want to alert the committee to?
No, I think just briefly to add, we got approval also at the last meeting to go out to recruit a further independent member for this committee. So we're hoping that will be in place for the June meeting when appointments are made to all of our committee arrangements.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, you wanted a quick word?
Yes, it's just a comment about the composition of the investment committee. That the Conservative group wrote to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority suggesting that there ought to be some political balance on that committee. It's the portfolio holders from the five local authorities. And, you know, we fully acknowledge we live in a democracy, and if that seems to be the best way to do things, you know, it's entirely possible to continue to run that investment committee in the way that it is. But usually a bit of a disparate debate on things never does any harm. Clearly there's a majority of one party on that committee, and we think as a Conservative group, not even necessarily for a member of our party, but any other party, I think it would promulgate a healthier debate about a complex situation that could only benefit deliberations and conclusions. So I'm not sure where that fits in with anything, but we do think that quite genuinely, and that's not a political thing, it's a genuine observation. I think it could be improved upon.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for that comment. I'm going to ask Angela to give a response, but I think I can say that those comments will definitely be taken into consideration in terms of all the thinking that is being done about what the committee structure is going to be following the election of the Mayor. So thank you for that comment. Angela?
Yeah, I would. I'd support that. I think that this is clearly a time of change, and we will be looking at how the committees are, how they're going to operate. There clearly will be views coming in from a mayor. I know this concern's been flagged before, and I know responses have been given that certainly the members of the investment committee feel they are quite robust in their consideration. We have also the backup that the initial decisions are recommendations from the investment committee, which do go back to combined authority. So there are some safeguards in place, but I think it's probably appropriate to say that those concerns are registered, that we are aware of them, and we'll bear that in mind as committee arrangements are further developed over the coming months.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Lee. Okay, if that's it, I will bring the meeting to an end. I think we've met Mark wanting to leave early. Brisk approach to the business there, Mark, to allow you to make your other appointment. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your attention. Thank you. Bye.
Could I wish your husband a speedy recovery from his broken leg? Sorry to hear that.
He was leafleting for me because I'm up for re-election. So greater love hath no man. Thank you all.
Well, good luck.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.